So what today is all about is we're going through the top 5 submissions for this particular challenge. Of course, they're going to be in random order because otherwise it really doesn't make a lot of sense for me to cover them and then, reveal the winner whilst I'm still showcasing who the winner is, right? So I'm going to go through the top 5 without telling who's in which place, but just talking about the top 5 in general. What about certain things that we liked about these reports, certain things that we noticed that could be improved upon for the next submissions. And the things that we talk about, they're pretty much okay, let's not say pretty much, but in most cases, they're universal. So a lot of the things that you're going to hear me talk about is something that is applicable to every single report that you build. So, sure, there might be some nuances and things like that, but a lot of these things is something you need to take care of whilst building any single report. And one thing I just want to remind you guys is that, trust me, if you manage to build a report in a single go without any additional, fixes or changes, I envy you, because that usually doesn't happen. Usually it's a back and forth process. That's why there's a communication between the end user and yourself, and sometimes even the project manager, when you try to understand all the requirements. You showcase different solutions and you try to find the best solution that fits the actual end user, because he's going to be the one using the report, right? Just because you feel comfortable doesn't mean that the end user is going to understand how to utilize this report. So a lot of things are going to be very generic and something that could be applicable to almost every single report that's out there. So yeah, we're going to talk about these sort of things. We're going to talk about specific things regarding the top 5 submissions. Of course, the main, let's say, point in this agenda is announcing the winner. We're going to have a minute or two to congratulate the winner, talk about some certain things, if anybody, highlights them or anything like that. But yeah, that's what we're really here all about today. Covering the top 5, giving you some feedback on these certain things, answer your questions, and announce who's the winner for this particular challenge. All right, you guys ready? Let me just move some of the screens around so it's a little bit easier for me to navigate. And let's get things rolling. Okay, we're going to start off with this one. So, one of the submissions that has gotten into the top 5 comes from Iris Meyuto-Krago, and I'm very deeply sorry if I mispronounce your names, guys. I apologize up front. I hope I did a good job, but you never know. So one of the submissions that's in the top 5 is this one from Iris. So let's take a closer look at what has been done here. Let's open it up. And let's actually open it up in a separate tab, because we can make the screen a little bit larger so it's a little bit more intuitive and easier to navigate. All right, so what do we have here? We can see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different pages. There was no limitation as for the number of pages you could have in this challenge, which is one of the benefits, I think. But it also means you don't necessarily need to always go way abroad, right? Keep it simple, make it interesting. So one of the things that caught my eye here is when I first saw the overview and then saw the subsections, I had a feeling that essentially what this is going to be is it's going to be the same overview, but covering different topics, right? The overview felt for me like a page name. But as you can see, if I hover over it, it changes the status or the state that it's in, meaning that this most likely is a button. So I started to play around a little bit. So for example, if we click on movies, we can see that we go to a different page, producers, we go to a different page, and the overview is the starting page. Since this is a page, one of the things that I would probably recommend is try to adjust its position somewhere else. Because right now, if it's a particular page that you want the users to be able to get back to, it feels like it's a little bit out of place. You have a nice row of pages right here, you have the slicers right here, but this overview feels like it's, added on the last minute and just, you're gonna sit here. That's the first initial feeling I got from it. My recommendation probably would be have the same overview page also in the same line, make these a little bit more narrow, maybe, or alternatively, you can see there's also languages and years as a slicer. For years, if I open it up, everything's good. But for languages, if we start to go through the values that are in this slicer, you can see that some of the language names are actually getting cut off. So that's not a good practice. So what I would probably do is actually move this slightly higher and make it more narrow. so that I can fit two of them underneath each other. Then you have a little bit extra room, which gives you enough room to have also overview page right here. So that's one of the recommendations that I would do here. I like the fact that you have listened to what we previously have talked about, and you actually highlight the page that you are on right now so that the user can understand where he is right now. But the one thing is, regarding the overview, you can see that the overview never really changes its appearance, right? And that's why I said that this felt a little bit out of place. It seems like there's a structure for all of these items except for the overview. So it's a small little detail, right? It's not like a major thing you have to worry about, or you're going to have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out on how to fix this. It's the small things that make the user experience what it is. Never forget about this, right? All these small little details is what combined creates the user experience. Every single small typo, every single unnecessary pixel that you have and that sort of stuff, just always make sure you look at it and you can understand what's really happening here. So that's one thing. The one thing that I really liked about your approach here is, for example, if we go to the movies, and you have this also in other pages, the same similar principle, that, for example, I can quickly focus either on the top or the bottom. So top and lowest movies, which was a great touch. But there's one thing that bothered me here. If you look at these visuals right here, so for example, I am at top movies right now. Okay. Now, if you look at these two visuals, right, we can see that right now we're sorting based on ranking. At the top of the rank is end of the line, which has an average rating of 10. Excellent. Whilst on the left-hand side, I don't know what the sorting is based upon. So this seems that this has been sorted by something else. And the first thought that I had here is, oh, I'm just going to, a small little issue, right? Nothing too big. I can just click on ranking and that's going to sort it out. I click on it and it's sorting it now in a ascending order. You can see, nothing really changed here. I click on it again to change it the other direction, and you can see nothing changes here again. So my guess is there's something wrong with the data setup here. Because if you try out the same approach with ROI, so return of investment, you can see that now it's descending, now it's ascending, so it works. As for the ranking, something seems off. Because once you sort it, it doesn't matter which direction you sort it, it's always returning you the same value. Because what I would be expecting here essentially is to have some sort of symmetry between these two. If we're talking about ranking, I'm always sorting by ranking, also the table, so I can easily compare the information. Now, if I would want to see, or actually I can hover over it, but if I want to see the ROI, I can either highlight it, or I would have to find the movie here. So this is one of those things that I usually emphasize on as well, is make sure that when a user first sees the data that you're presenting to him, it's in a reliable way. So they can go through it and say, oh, okay, that makes sense. But besides that, I like the approach that you did here. Like I said, I like that you went with the top movies and lowest movies. So you're trying to focus on both ends of the spectrum, and you allow the user to sort by different mechanisms. So by ranking, popularity, or return of investment. So this one I really like. But like I said, the one thing that I felt is kind of falling short is you're changing it here for this visual. You might have as well saved bookmarks for the for the order. Because when you save bookmarks, if we go right here, so I'm just going to make a new bookmark. Let's make a table. I don't know. Let's go for genres. Doesn't really matter. Genres and budget, for example. I'm going to go for top to bottom, and I'm also going to make that sum of budget is greater than, or is not blank, basically. I'm going to remove some of the entries. Okay, so once you save a bookmark, not a report, and you right click on it, you can see there's a couple of options here that you can change. And those are if the data is captured, if the display mode is captured, if it's current page, if you're referencing all visuals or selected visuals. So when you're saving the bookmark, it also saves the column and the sort direction. So for example, right now I'm sorting in descending order based on the budget. I'm actually going to make, sorry guys, I'm going to make the fonts a little bit bigger so it's easier for you to see. Let's say global font size 14. Yeah, there we go. So you can see, for example, the highest budget is under drama section. So I'm going to save this in bookmark 1 and call it descending. I'm going to change the sort mechanism. And there we go. The other favorite thing, make sure that the width of the column is the same for both approaches. So now it's in ascending order. So when you switch between them, it also switches everything else, right? Like I said, it's a small little thing, but these small little things makes the whole difference. So that's one of the things. The other thing that I actually liked about it is that you had a lot of different, let's say, dimensions and how you can look at things. The only thing that I was kind of missing or trying to understand is, for example, for Roy, you have color coding, right? And I understand what the color coding in is whilst I was looking at the data. But my suggestion would be make sure that you give some sort of a tooltip, some sort of a hint to the user so he can understand what the coloring means. Basically, there are 3 types of colors. It's very high numbers. Let's go for something smaller and see if we can try to capture all 3 of them. There we go. Yeah. So we have red, we have yellow, and we have a light green one. So what these 3 colors represent is basically if the ROI is with a red color, it means that it didn't get back the money that they invested. Yellow means they're close to it. Green means they made profit, right? It's kind of easy to understand, but trust me, giving that information to the user, nobody's going to tell me, I don't need that. And if they tell you that, you can always remove it. It's easier to remove stuff than to add it afterwards. But like I said, there's always going to be changes for one way or another. You can even see it based on the budget, for example. They're still losing money, but they're close to breaking it even. Well, relatively close. I don't know, 150K for me, a lot of money. For them, for a movie budget, probably pennies. But yeah, that's one other thing. If we go through other pages, one thing I want you guys to always remember, specifically when you're talking about location and maps. So for example, if we look at the map right now, you can see that whenever I come to this page, the starting position of the map is somewhere on the left-hand side where half of the screen is white, and I'm focusing only on basically North and South America. Why this is happening? This is most likely happening because of this reason. If you create a map visual, let's close some of these tabs so it's a little bit easier to see things. There we go. Make a visual, perfect. I think the table, yep, latitude and longitude. From the master table, we're gonna take revenue. There we go. And probably actually apply a filter where on the whole page where the revenue, not bad. Actually, we could go for basic. Make sure to remove the ones that didn't have any revenue or were blank, just as an example to play around with the data set, right? So one other thing that's happening with the map visual, if you go to the formatting options and you open up base layer settings, so the base layer is the let's say the grid that you have behind it. That's the actual map that you see, right? And if you scroll down, you're going to find this section, autofocus. So in autofocus, you have a couple of different modes that you can use. Auto means it's always going to make sure that you see all the available data. What I mean by this, if I make a table, for example, and I choose a country, you can see it zooms to it as long as I have data for it. So the more data I have, the further away from the map actually the zoom level goes, right? So it just ensures that you see everything. And my guess, what happened in this report is instead of auto, Iris selected saved position and then did the following. So They had the map like this. Either they were testing things out or just playing around with the visual, because not always this is intentional. So for example, they did something like this, right? Had the map right here. You can see there's quite a bit of white space, and then they saved the report. What's happening at this point, saved position means that whenever you save the report, the actual view that you had in the map is saved within the memory of the visual. So that is going to be the view that it opens up every single time you open up the report now. And trust me, these small little things, even with bookmarks, for example, you might accidentally save things which are not necessary at that point of time. Okay, in this case, it's going to take a while because I remember this data set. If you're using whole of it, it's like 300 megabytes. But let it work in the back. Okay, it did work. So now when I switch between pages, you can see this is what it brings me back to. If you would just switch the same back to auto and say that, just as an example, that for example, minimum zoom is 2. Just playing around again with the numbers. So what the map is going to do whenever you open up the report or switch to the page, it's going to adjust the viewport so that you see everything that's within it. And my guess is, like I said, it's not that the creator, Iris, did it intentionally. Most likely, they just were playing around with the data set, trying to see all the data and everything, had it like this, and just saved the report with the changes, not thinking about the consequences. This is why you always go back through your report and just double check everything. Don't necessarily check it on the desktop version. The way I usually check it is also on the services. So whenever we, for example, give you the publish to web link, just go through it first. See if anything is missing, if anything feels wrong. If that's the case, just reach out to us. We can always fix it. You can resubmit a new version. That's not an issue. Just don't think that everything is going to work straight away. It's one of the suggestions I can always give to you. Trust me, everybody who has worked with a lot of reports over the time is going to tell you that these things happen. It's fine. You just fix it. Go through it, fix it, send a new version. Nobody's going to be angry about it. The other thing is going through the pages. Yeah, the other thing that I really liked about this approach is that you actually had a very similar layout. So you weren't, yeah, sure, there are changes in some certain cases, right? But for the most part of it, when you go through the pages, you can see that you have the same layout, you have similar visuals, so it's easy for a user to understand what is happening at what point. So that is one of the things that I definitely like. The info button, I like that you actually paid attention and made a different info button for different pages, because not everyone does that. So that's a good thing. And of course, the clear slicers to get back to the initial view. Yeah, I would say those are my main comments regarding this particular report. So thanks again, Iris, for submitting a report, and congratulations in getting into the top 5. We'll see if you're the winner. All right, the next one. The next submission that has gotten into the top 5 is from Agbata Dixon Onkoloyo. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Let's go ahead and open it up and look at the report. So the one thing that I liked about this particular design itself is it's monochromatic, meaning that there's not a lot of color, but you're using lighter and darker shades for accents, right? Which is a great approach. There's nothing wrong with it, especially in some cases you actually have to do this. So this gives you a good way to practice with it. I like the fact that you provided a little bit of context. So for example, when you look at the data, you have some insights on top of it. You don't have too many of them, which is good. I know we have had submissions previously where people try to make the most out of it, right? And they create basically a separate page or a section in the page with like 20 different comments. If that is the report that somebody's asking viewer to build, that's fine. But for general use cases, nobody is going to look at 20 different sentences, right? They want to see what's happening now, and they want to understand why it's happening. That's why you have the drill down visuals. So the other thing that I noticed here is, for example, you have total budget and total budget last year. Okay, I'm comparing 2 different years. But this only works when you are comparing 1 year versus the other. What happens if I select multiple years? If you select multiple years, there's never going to be a difference. Or it's actually very close to each other. You can see right here, for example. So I would double check the calculations. That's one thing. The other thing is when you're talking about changes in budgets and revenues, and you know that the numbers are going to be very small, my recommendation would be never leave just the whole percentage. Add either 1 or 2 decimal numbers so that the user sees that there is some sort of a difference. Because right now it seems like, well, 234.8 billion, 234 billion, I guess they're the same, but you have an arrow going upwards, meaning that there is some sort of increase from the last period. But I have no idea how much it is. It tells me that there is an increase, but it doesn't show me the increase. So it's just one of those things that I particularly, for example, get sometimes frustrated with, right? If you showcase that, I want to see that you always have a number there. So for example, if you're going with percentages, add like 1 or 2 decimals, because sometimes you're going to have changes in 0.1% or 0.5% or something like that. That's one thing. The other thing, we have the 2 pages here, right? And remember what I told about Iris's report. I love the fact, and I appreciate the fact, that you showcase which page are you on right now. The reason why this bugged me so much for this particular report is because if you look at the name of the page, which is right here, you can see it's budget and revenue. Revenue is the second part of the naming, meaning that it's a secondary thing, right? Budget is the primary object. But the page name is revenue. So my first thought process was that, okay, they've probably done similar to what Iris did. They have some sort of an overview page, and this is the overview page. And then they have 2 other pages, which is revenue and popularity. But it wasn't the case. In this case, revenue is actually the same page that you have right here. How do I know it? Well, because I tried, for example, filtering things out and clicking on revenue. It's going to bring me back to the same view, meaning that this is the same page. So not only adjust the names and make sure that it's easier for user to understand where he's at right now, but the other thing is make sure you highlight the page that you're currently on. Like for example, in this one as well. There's other variations on how you can do it, but you can see that, for example, the user always knows which page he's on right now. Same approach here. Just change the highlight, not the highlight, sorry, but the background for the button that is active. So the best way on how you do it is if you're using, for example, bookmarks. If you're going with individual bookmarks, then you would have to create duplicates. But if you have created bookmarks, just for example, ascending, descending, right? And instead of adding individual buttons, which is an option, so I could do something like that, right? I could go for individual buttons. I could say that this is, for example, ascending. This is also ascending. And this one's going to be not selected. This one's going to be selected. So I'm just changing the default style for it. So I'm going to say that the one that is selected, I'm going to have a little bit of background, which is light blue. And then I just switch between the 2 objects. So one becomes visible, other becomes invisible, right? Similar how you do visual switches. The other way around this is if you're using bookmarks in particular, use the bookmark navigator rather than individual buttons. So under buttons, choose navigator and bookmark navigator. Open it up. You're going to see you have 2 bookmarks. That's the first step. The tricky part here is make sure that you group your bookmarks. You want to know why? Because if I add additional bookmarks now, you can see they're all being added right here. So what you need to do is make sure you group these bookmarks. Sorry, I'm going to go back to the page. So you select both of them, right click, group them. So now I have a group and some individual bookmarks. Go back to the bookmark navigator formatting options, find bookmarks, and here you switch from all to that specific group. So this is going to ensure that you only have these bookmarks which are in this group. If I add any additional bookmarks, you can see it's not affecting me. If I decide at one point that, hey, I'm actually going to have a third view there, sure, just drag it into the group. If you want to change the order of them, just change it. The reason why this is in some cases a little bit easier is because you no longer have to work with individual elements, but you're working with one element. And you can just say based on the styles. So the selected, for example, like we have black color with white font on top of it, I'm going to say, hey, the font color is actually going to be light blue. And the fill color is going to be, I don't know, purple. Not a great color choice, but hey, it's a sample. It's going to work fine, right? Switch it to something else. For example, the hover. The hover is going to be still with black letters, but the fill color is going to be light blue. So I don't have to do this 3 times. I do it for one as a useful grouping mechanism just. So always just choose your battle. You know, with bookmarks, trust me, I've spent countless of hours. I would say probably hundreds of hours just playing around with bookmarks to make sure that I understand how they work, what's the best solution, and so forth. And trust me, there are still tricks that I don't know, which is one of the reasons why I always recommend to play around or look into the community posts. Trust me, there's people doing crazy stuff in the community. There's a lot of workarounds that nobody knew about before seeing a post or a YouTube video or something. It's what it is, right? You can't know everything. So we have a question from Barry. So which email should I use if I want to reach you? I'd say, so yeah, I'm gonna quickly broadcast it. And the email you want to use to reach out to us is just send an email to webinars@zoomcharts.com. Once you get in touch with the team, if it's something specific that I can handle, they're gonna just forward it to me directly. So use the webinars for now, and then once we get in touch, we can always stick to the private emails. That's fine. All right. So yeah, for this one, like I said, the page, the color of the pages, just small little details, but they make a lot of difference. The next thing, pay attention to how you save your bookmarks and the states you're currently in. So for example, when you switch to popularity page, one of the things that I did, similar to how I did in the Iris report, right? I started to play around with different sortings. You have a table. It's one of the features of the table that you can dynamically just change the sorting based on one or the other column. So one thing that I noticed here is, for example, I was like, okay, I actually want to see based on average vote. And you can see what happens here. This is happening because by default, if you do not touch the table, if you don't resize the columns specifically, they have a marker enabled. I think it was, let's just add something so it's there. There we go. Auto size width. If this is marked, and if you haven't adjusted this size manually, what can happen is this. See, I just clicked on one of the headers to change the sorting mechanism, but now I can't even see the whole name, or I even completely lost the sorting that I was applying initially. If I now resize the columns to something that fits in nice and neatly, for example, the star rating, since there's 10, you can either have all of them, and then again, just resize this a little bit, or, make it by 5 in 2 rows. You decide how you want to showcase this. But once you have adjusted this, I can then change different sorting mechanisms and so forth. I can start to play around. You can see, okay, we actually had an outlier here. There we go. So in this case, I still want to have, for example, slightly smaller names, and I increase the width of this. So just play around with the table. Don't be afraid. It's not going to bite you. And it's going to save a lot of unnecessary comments from the end users. That's one. Then, of course, try to have some sort of order to things. Like, for example, here it seems like it's based on alphabet, but most likely it would have to be probably based on the runtime or something. It's my guess. Years, play around with the values, and I'm guessing that if a movie doesn't have a release here, don't keep it as blank, keep it as undefined or something. Blank just seems like you don't have data for it. Same goes for genres, which in this case, you can see that we have a couple of movies that don't have a genre assigned to them. And once I select it, it kind of beats the purpose of this visual, right? Top 5 genres by popularity. Because if I choose one of them, it's still going to be there because it's an actual genre. But if I choose blank, there's nothing to showcase. But if you do just a regular if statement and say, hey, if genre is blank, return undefined, otherwise return the genre itself, I would still have a visual there. So just play around with the options that the dataset gives you. When you see these datasets, for example, I know that some of you might have comments and say that, yeah, but this was very, unclean dataset. Welcome to the real life. If we would have clean datasets where everything was, preset for us and ready, that would be just the best day of my life. But that's usually not the case. You have to manage to deal with these. If you can't deal with this, that's also fine, but try to eliminate as much of these small little errors or shortcomings of the dataset. So that's one thing. And the last thing is there is a possibility to clear all filters. I'm guessing what this was representing, because that was the feeling that I got from it, right? Reset filters or clear filters. But the bookmark is saved on one page. So if I clear filter from this one, it actually takes me to the first one. But like I said, none of these things is something that you cannot fix in just a couple of minutes or, let's say half an hour. That's nothing in comparison. You can go through these things and make the report even better. So don't worry about that. All right. Thanks again, Agbada, for the submission. I congratulate you for getting into the top 5. And let's see if you're potentially maybe the winner of this challenge. So let's go to the next one. So the next one is from Pradamesh. Pradamesh, congratulations on again getting yet another submission in the top 5. Sort of a seasoned veteran right here, right? So let's see what you've done with the report. Let's open it up. All right, so the first things first. The one thing that I really like about the report is that there's not too much information, right? Sure, we have 5 different charts. Remember what I said, right? Cards are not visuals. Cards are cards. But we have 5 different visuals which showcase different dimensions. And one of the things that Pradamesh has actually done here, he's limited the amount of information that it showcases. So in some cases, he's focusing on the top 5 movie release, but all the categories are still visible. And this is actually something that he's done on a data set himself. So what he did and decided that it's an interesting dimension to look at is to showcase the movies released or the count of movies based on each runtime. And instead of going just, every single individual minute, he actually used the grouping mechanisms for it. You can use the grouping quite simple. So if we go to, I'm just going to have a new page so I don't have anything extra disturbing for you guys. So if I go to the master table and I see we had a runtime. Yeah, we have a runtime column right here. Right click on it, new group, and there are few ways on how you can do this. When it's a number, there are pretty much 2 primary ways on how you can do this. You can either create groups by binning or listing them. Creating a bin means you're essentially working with a bucket. So for example, when I choose bin, you can see there are 2 ways on how I can define the size of the bin/bucket, whether I define the size of the bucket or I define the number of buckets. So for example, I'm going to say that size of bins, and every single bin is going to be 20 minutes. And you can see that I have starting from 0 to 14,400. That's a lot. Okay, let's just increase it to 1,000. So every group that it creates is going to be from basically 1,000 values. I click OK. It creates right here a new category. And if I, for example, create the same regular combo chart, just as an example, use the category, I'm guessing the calculate, yeah, it was an incorrect procedure, but hey. So runtime, vote count as an example. You can see that actually everything falls underneath 0. So I'm like, why is that? That's probably because a lot of these were outliers. So, the numbers weren't matching up. So most probably what I'm going to do is actually go back to the grouping, edit groups, and say that, hey, created based on, for example, 20. You can see there's a lot more groups now. There we go. I can see some outliers. We might potentially have those. There's no limitation. You can just figure out what you want to do there. But what I'm going to do is I could example have just a regular slicer and say that, okay, all the movies starting from 0 up until 200 minutes, showcase those bins. As for the way on how you sort them, you could sort it based on a value, but I could also just quickly switch to sort based on a category in an ascending order, because these are numbers. So this gives you a distribution chart. And you can see that most of the movies are actually having a runtime of 80 and 120, somewhere in between those lines. If you wanted to see, okay, specific minutes, okay, add runtime under the groups. And if I open up 100, you can see exactly where these, like not outliers, but where these categories are sitting. So that's one of those. Now, going back to this one. The info button is there, which allows the user to quickly understand what I'm looking at and so forth. The clear slicers is great. I can select things and get back to the initial view. That's all good. But there's one thing Prada Mesh that I noticed, which was kind of bothering me a little bit. And that is this visual right here. So at first I was like, okay, distribution movie released by language. So first you have language groups and then languages. Okay, there must be a lot of, language regions or groups. So I just wanted to see how many there are. There's only 2 extra. Sure, you might think that, okay, the chart could have just done it automatically, right? But the chart's primary goal is to make sure that the labels are visible and they're not very small. So that's the initial, kind of chart behavior. But if you see, for example, a scenario like this, like when you open up a page and there's 6 categories, but you only see 4 of them, and there's only those 2 extra, so you want to bring them in. So what you can do is, if you create a combo bar chart, right? Let's say, again, the same bins, for example, that we had previously based on word count. Doesn't really matter what I'm exactly showcasing here. There we go. So you can see there's actually a lot more of them, right? Let's say I want to focus on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 or 7, right? So this would be the starting view, down to 60. So what I would do is I just reload the chart and see what the default behavior is. So we can see actually, but the default behavior, if it's a full reload, would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 positions. I would narrow it down to 5, for example. So one of the things that you can do is go under the y-axis. If you're using a combo bar, it's the y-axis. If you're using the combo, this would be the x-axis. So the axis where you have your categories. And then just play around with this initial unit width or height, depending on which visual. So I would say, I don't know, let's try maybe something like 50. Switch between the pages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. So this ensures that despite the screen size, the zoom level, and so forth, you're going to see these 5 different categories. In the same principle, you can play around with these values and say decrease it to something like, I don't know, 30. Reload the visual and see, okay, this is the default view. So play around with those and make sure that the user gets as much information as possible. So that goes for that as well. As far as the rest of the things is, I like also the fact that you created some seasonality for it. so you created basically a chart that allows you to see based on decades, because there's a lot of different years. We go from 1980s in this case up to 2030. I'm guessing these are, movies in the future. But hey, it was in the data set. So you have the seasonality. The legend allows you to switch between different seasonalities and look at the actual trend lines of how things are being conveyed there. You can drill down into one of them. You can actually zoom in closer if you need to. So there's a little bit of flexibility there. If you try to filter out through these things, the one thing that I felt that I'm still kind of missing in this particular report is I felt that I want to have a little bit more drill down into it, right? I want to see things that are underneath it. Like, for example, the same here, where you have already created groups of 40 to 60. I wanted to be able to drill down, for example, into either smaller groups or just individual minutes, just so I would have a feeling that there's some depth to it. Getting back to the reset, let's go back to the revenue page now. And similar approach. You create it based on whether the company has been established or not. The one thing that I would be inclined to understand here is, how do you define which company is new and which one is established? Like, is it based on years? Is it based on movies? Is it based on revenue? That's the one tricky part where you would have to, provide some sort of a context as to what defines an established company. But that's just me. Here again, same approach. See, if I come to this page, these 4 little things, there's only 2 more. So by playing around with the unit width, I would be able to get all of them here. So movies, genres, languages, and production company. The one thing I want to test out here quickly is, okay, that works fine. Movie language. There we go. What have I told you guys about the slicers? Always make sure that you play around with the slicers so that every single selection that you create does result in something. In this case, for example, if we choose movie language in Efron, we can see that there's nothing here. So there is no revenue for this particular movie. If we're talking about, a revenue, I would expect that all of these movies have at least a bit of revenue. If it would be just an overview where nothing in particular is being showcased, in those cases, I understand that, for example, you might have movies which don't have a revenue, or probably not budget, because you need budget to make a movie. Even if it's labor hours, it's still money. But when it comes to revenue, I would expect that every single selection returns something, that there is some sort of revenue. Well, see, yeah, $1 is $1. Hey, they made revenue. But just trying to avoid these sort of scenarios. Other than that, it's a very well polished report. I like the fact that it's not too overcrowded. The navigation is quite simple. It's right here at the top. It's sticking to one frame. And yeah, I have nothing else really to add here. So congratulations on your report, Pramesh, and congratulations for being in the top 5. All right, let's go to the next one. The next submission is from Esther. Congratulations, Esther. Esther is also one of our participants who has been participating in the challenges for a while now, so it's always good to see how she's being, developing her skills and getting higher and higher. All right, let's start off. Let's see what's here. So I like the fact that you also are trying new different things, right? And the one thing that I notice here is, for example, this flipping card. It's a nice little touch. It allows you to save space because you're utilizing the same space for 2 different metrics, the budget and the revenue. The one thing, though, that I would like you to do here is, for example, add some sort of shortening, for example. Because, let's be honest, for somebody to read this value straight away, it does take a while. That's one thing. The other thing, I like the fact that you made sure that if you are using some sort of concatenation or display units, you're actually utilizing a decimal number, right? So it's not just, for example, 1 trillion. So you're actually showcasing a little bit of detail there. You can filter things out on the timeline. You can use the donut chart and focus on the top 5 genres based on movie revenue and so forth. The profits, you can focus on a specific producer, see his timeline when he's, for example, when he has worked on certain movies and released movies, and how are they in comparison to the budget? How have they actually met their budget, or they have surpassed it? So that's one interesting thing to look at. The one thing though is when you play around with, for example, the navigation on this report. So for example, if I go from revenue to countries, you can see that these slicers start to move around a bit. So I would just say, pay a little bit more attention to these transitions between the pages, right? So this allows you to just ensure that user doesn't have a feeling that you're kind of jittering the whole report. It's staying in one place, he knows where to find it, and it's easy to go through. Similar to how it was in Prathmesh's report, I would most likely double check all the possible combinations. Because for example, you might run across something like this. You have a producer which doesn't have anything almost. No revenue, no budget, no nothing. So I would either add them to a separate category or exclude them from the list currently. So that's one thing. The other thing, the gauge visual. The gauge visual is not a bad visual, but make sure, guys, you understand how to use it properly. Like, the one thing that seems a little bit weird in this case is that by default, what the gauge visual does is, so for example, if I just make a new gauge visual, right? And let's say I'm going to add a vote count, doesn't really matter what it is. So what happens is the minimum value is always going to be 0 unless you define it on something else specifically. You have the value definitions here where you can use just a regular measure. Then you're going to have the average on the middle, and then you have a maximum, which is basically 2 times the original value. So regardless of what you do, you can see that the chart pretty much stays the same. Like, it's not getting anywhere closer to anything. This line moves, yes, but this line is always going to be in the middle. The gauge visual should be filling up based on the minimum and maximum values. So the minimum value essentially would be 0. The maximum you can get for a vote is 10. So that would be a hard-coded value. And then you would use either the fill or the needle to showcase where on the line are you. Otherwise, I would say, it's kind of missing the point that I was kind of looking for here. I get the idea, but it's not a great representation of the visual itself. But it's a nice approach. Now, if we go to the countries section, you can see that we can use the map visual and use the shapes, for example, to filter things out. We can click either on the shape, or we can click on a particular genre and see a particular movie to see where, for example, they have been generating from. The one thing that I would probably play around with it a bit is on the map visual. Again, if we look at the base layer, I think it was in this page. No, page 6. Yep. So on page 6, we had the map base layer. You can still keep the autofocus, which is great, but just make sure you also play around with the max zoom. Because if I, for example, choose just one of the countries, I don't want it to get this close, because it's not going to help me with anything. Since we're talking about countries, it's a higher level. So I would most likely go to the base layer and say, okay, don't get anywhere closer than maybe 12. So that when you move around the map, you're actually sitting still relatively distant and can see the shape of the area. It's one little thing. The reset button just works just fine. The revenue, this slicer, I would most likely change it to be slider. Because here, if I wanted to go to millions, there's a lot of scrolling involved into it. Whereas if you would set it to be just a regular slider, so for example, let's say the same revenue, This would allow me to say, hey, I want to focus on movies which are from 1 million to 2 million very easily. That's one of my comments. But yeah, other than that, great report. And thank you for participating and congratulations on being in the top 5. And the last report that is in the top 5 comes from Toyin. Congratulations, Toyin. It's nice to see one of your reports yet again in the top 5. So for this report, let's quickly open it up, go through it, and then we're going to announce the winner. Come on, there we go. So the few things that I liked about this report is that you change some of the things on how you sort of set your focus. So for example, when you move between the pages, you can see you're using the generally same layout, but with slight adjustments. And what I like here is that instead of just focusing on cities or countries specifically, you're also focusing on continents. So you can easily, for example, just select Africa or Asia or Antarctica. Yeah, see, this one, play around or check the coordinates. But other than that, it's a good one. That's a good one. And here you can also see, for example, there might be something a little bit off. But other than that, I like the fact that you give the possibility for the end user not to focus just on the countries, but also on the continents. Since you have a map visual which showcases where you can drill down closer and so forth to see the split results, you can actually also see the network chart, which represents the same results, but just as a mesh. So that allows you to kind of see how things are correlating and connected to each other. The info buttons are there. You can clear the filters if it's necessary to get back to the initial state. You can also use the network to filter. You can use the table to filter. So there's a lot of direction to it. But if we go back to the overview page, this visual allows you to focus on 3 main things. So whether it's the number of movies released, whether it's the budget or revenue. So that allows you for a little bit more in-depth analysis. But the one thing that kind of got me curious a bit, okay, I'm not going to be able to replicate it right now, of course, right? Of course, I'm not going to be able to replicate it. I mean, it's a live demo. No, not a demo, but a live session. So of course, I'm not going to be able to replicate it. Great. Never mind what I just said, right? If I'm not able to replicate it, that's not a point anymore. But yeah, the one thing that I would pay a little bit attention to is, for example, these sort of things when you have a text block. I don't have anything against text blocks if they provide valuable information. But here, this is the reason why you test it out on different environments. So you test it out in an embedded environment. You can see that here everything is working. But if you open up a full screen mode, you can see that the text suddenly scales differently slightly. And there's a little bit of scroll bar. It's a very quick fix, right? Just adjusting the sizing or the font size or a few other things that you could play around with there. But it's one of the things to always notice. And the other thing is the total votes based on the categories. I like this one as well. I'm not going to tell, I'm going to tell, right? At first, when I looked at this, I thought that maybe you were trying to tell me something because it's very, very, I mean, you can probably see what I'm talking about. It kind of feels like you're flipping me off. But that's just the data. So even though I like it, be careful of how the visuals look like. People might get the wrong idea. Don't worry. It's all good. But yeah, I like the fact that you can actually switch between these different dimensions and that you can look and slice and dice through it. The one thing that I feel is missing also from other reports that were in the top 10, not the top 10, sorry, but the top 5 is I felt that there's a little bit of lack of depth, meaning that a lot of the visuals were one-dimensional. So there's only one level of drill down, which if you think about how things are progressing and what the industry is kind of starting to look at is these reports are starting off with an overview, but they need to have a possibility to drill down and look at certain details and more nuanced view, right? You want to understand the overall situation, but you also want to understand why or how So it's one of the things that I would recommend for everybody for the next challenge is to think about also the drill down aspect of things. Because one-dimensional reports are not bad, but they're getting outnumbered by multi-dimensional reports. So just take that into account. But other than that, it's a great report, Toyin. Congratulations for being in the top 10, and thanks for participating. So the moment you've been all waiting for, right? Trying to understand which is going to be the winner of this particular challenge. So let me just get everything ready. And a little bit of drum roll, please. The winner is Radamesh Saman. Congratulations, man. You're getting a lot of accolades, right? You should starting to get a ribbon or something. But yeah, Prathamesh has won the challenge. He had the best report based on the jury's voting and based on the criteria that we provided. Never forget that for every single challenge, you have the brief where you have the judging criteria. So if we go here, judging criteria, you have all the necessary information. You can see which answers you need to provide within the report. You see what are the technical requirements and what are the judging criteria. So what are the three main categories we go through. So take a note of that, look at some of the previous reports and just, make a better one. It's all I can really recommend. But yeah, Prathamesh, congratulations from my side. Thanks to everybody who submitted their reports for this challenge. Congratulations also to everybody who had gotten their reports into the top 5. I can tell you that the scoring was actually kind of close. So you were all very close, neck to one each other. But there were minor differences that, swayed the judges in one way or another. So congratulations to Prathamesh, congratulations to the top 5, and thank you for everybody who decided to participate in the challenge. Don't get discouraged by the fact that you didn't get into the top 5. That's nothing to be worried about. The challenges and the community is all about learning, right? Sure, you didn't get in the top 5 this month. Go for another one. Get into the top 5 or become the winner. It's all up to you. It depends on how much you're willing to put, time and effort into it. That's it. Other than that, I really don't want to take any more of your time, guys. I really appreciate for you tuning in, seeing the top 5, looking and seeing what I have to tell about them. Other than that, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next webinar for Onyx Data, where we're going to talk about the new data set that we have for it. So see you in the next webinar, and if you have any other questions or anything that you think I missed, make sure you reach out to us, and we'll get back to you on that. Thank you, everyone, and have an amazing evening or day wherever you are. All right. Bye, everyone.